Here we have the experimental cruiser Yubari, tier 4 in the Japanese line. Its competitors are the Kuma and the Owaki. If you have it, you can't exactly go out and buy the Owaki, so it's not a competitor for all, but I'll be comparing it against both to see how competent it is. Really, there's been a lot of fuss about its combat capabilities, saying that it really doesn't deserve its tier, and especially doesn't deserve the price that's been put on it, so I'll be looking at that to see. Got 8,500 hit points, enough armor to stop an HE shell, but not much more, really. That's about it. And so onto the primary armament. It's got 440mm cannons in 2 twin turrets. As you can see here, they're exactly the same as on the Katori, the tier 1 cruiser. It has the same number of them as well. You can see why some people are somewhat upset about this. And same armament as on the other tier 4s, but slower rate of fire and fewer of them essentially. This is the 120mm secondary cannon. You can't directly control that, it fires at very close range. Its main function essentially is to double as AA. This is its anti-aircraft loadout, already been shown, as well as 8 of these 25mm single mounts, 4 at the front, 4 at the back. Fairly competent but short ranged. We've got some twin mounts as well. They actually have exactly the same effect in game as the single mounts, so not wildly effective, but you've got 4 of them, so between them there is another 4 single mounts essentially. But the triple mounts, somewhat better, 2 of them amidships here and 1 at the back. Nice little bunker position along with those 4 single mounts you can see. That's a fairly scary AA defense at the rear. All of this is very powerful. I mean, there's an awful lot of it, but 3 kilometers maximum range for everything other than the 120. You're not going to be shredding a lot of planes, and you can't really support other ships with it. 610mm torpedo tubes. These are its other big selling point apart from the AA. High caliber for the tier, but as you can see, only 2 twin mounts, quite far from the water as well, so they've got very narrow firing arcs. We'll compare them to the others when we get to the other ships. Just a quick check on the manoeuvrability before we go and compare it to the Kuma. 35 knots, 5-second rudder shift, and just less than 700m turning circle. Pretty agile, not all that fast. Kuma is the logical yardstick against which to measure it. Same class, same nation, same tier, so on. You can instantly see it's rather larger, it has the health to go with that, and rather better armour, although it's not exactly a battleship, it doesn't make all that much difference. And you can see a lot more cannon. It's the same type of cannon, but 7 of them, 6 to a broadside in 2 clumps. Got 6 on the broadside, and you've also got 3 on the frontal aspect, so no position really is in a worse position than the Yubari, and it's quite often better. These also have a marginally higher rate of fire, although not all that different. It's 0.4 of a second. Not so much, but more than half. Again, the broadside power is a fairly important difference, and the torpedoes are going to have to be a whole lot worse to make up for it, really. And they aren't. You've got the same number of torpedo tubes to a side, although the Kuma has the advantage of only having to reload one side once it's fired that side. It doesn't have the central mounts. It has slightly less damaging torpedoes, 10,000 as opposed to 14,000, and they also run about 5 knots slower, but it's got 7 kilometers range as opposed to 6. I'm not a fan of ultra long torpedoing, but that's a fairly important difference in range. And the arcs as well mean it's not all that much worse a torpedo boat than the Yubari is, really. I skip over the anti-aircraft because there isn't really any, and it's a tiny bit faster than the Yubari, but certainly a worse turner. Move on to the Owaki, which some of you will be able to trade out very closely for the Yubari. I mean, it's a premium ship as well, should earn nicely, so very much a competitor. Very sexy ship at bridge, the sandbag positions, the camouflage, it's very good looking. Absolute best ship in my book. In terms of health, it's pretty much on a par with Yubari, ever so slightly better. Armour, again, very much the same. It's really no more survivable than it. And moving on to its main armament, it's very much the same layout as the Kuma, but with one less gun on the broadside. So, very much a halfway house between the two. They're the same type of guns. The frontal firepower is the same on each, and then the broadside has that 4, 5, 6 gun barrage, depending on which one it is. The Yubari has that secondary cannon, but in direct fire it's essentially useless. It's an anti-aircraft gun and nothing more really. But those torpedoes, they're what the Yubari's torpedoes wish they were. They do more damage, they've got 4 kilometers more range, there are 6 of them as opposed to 4, which is always helpful, more likely to hit and do more damage if you're close up. And yeah, they've got agonisingly long reload times, arguably not more effective than the Kuma's torpedoes, but if you're going for that 610mm playstyle of the Yubari, then this is it, but more so. And some very sexy anti-aircraft mounts. That sandbag position in the back is definitely my favourite detail on any ship. It looks absolutely beautiful, fantastic, stunning. It's definitely got more of a presence than the Kuma, but it's not Yubari levels of anti-aircraft. You'll occasionally see this shoot something down, but it really doesn't have much to defend itself with. It certainly isn't enough to deter an attack. It's just the occasional lucky hit. And as for some reason the game's thrown a complete stroll, the audio's gone pale and I've had to cut it off, I think we'll just sum up a game, see how it plays, and I'll talk on a slightly less technical manner about strengths, weaknesses, and possibly what could be done to make it a better ship in the game. I jump straight into the first shot, so you don't have to see me AFKing into battle as I always do. And you'll quickly see that the guns really aren't that poor, that they do damage. I put some severe pain on the Congo, and they do their job later on. They make damage, but they're not fantastic. It's objectively true that it just doesn't have the firepower that several other ships at its tier have. You'll also see the problems of the tight torpedo spread presenting early on. Mostly have to abort the first torpedo attack because of the guy who's trying to sail right behind me and to my right. You'll find it's not a favour that gets repaid later. Scout aircraft comes overhead, gets destroyed in an instant. You'll see that's the only example of Yubari's anti-aircraft capabilities from us in this match, because actually we got put into a match where the enemy didn't have an aircraft carrier, which isn't fantastic for an anti-aircraft cruiser, but it'll allow us to showcase the direct combat capabilities as our main focus, which is probably what most people are more interested in anyway, to be honest. And here's the thing, its direct combat capabilities aren't actually that great. It can certainly stand up for itself in a fight and it can kill things, but it's not a machine designed for pub matches. The ideal rules for this thing are being a destroyer flotilla leader, as such light cruisers often were in real life. If you put it in a squad of destroyers and play it slightly more conservatively than the destroyers are, hang back a little bit and so on, you can keep up with their every race and turn. It's just as agile really, and it'll give the flotilla that little more punch that it needs sometimes, and also give it some anti-aircraft protection for those horribly annoying carrier chases that a lot of games devolve into with destroyers. Other than that, it can make a very good carrier guard that quite often when a team leaves one flank unguarded enough for destroyers to get through, you need a cruiser to hang back and actually defend the carriers, and this could do a very good job of that because it could help them out with the anti-aircraft duties when the enemy carriers inevitably prioritise their own class as the most important and send torpedo bombers after them. And it's also perfectly set up for intercepting destroyers and so on, which are trying to come through and kill the carriers. But these are very specialised roles. These are roles that you would get in team battles, clan wars, these kind of things, maybe in a very competent platoon, but not just random public matches. And this ship isn't set up for them. And so the question has to be, what can they do to make this a better pub match ship? Because it'll be better for wargaming if they do so, because they will sell more of the things if you can actually use them in the vast majority of games that most players play. And it'll also be better for those who buy them if they're actually, again, useful in those games. So it makes sense for them to adjust them in this way, but the question is how to actually achieve that effect. And the most obvious solution that comes to mind would be to fiddle with the soft stats on the armament. Now, since the armament is so identical to the Katoris in terms of cannon, you can't really change them. The torpedoes, they already run fast, their distance is about right for the tier, but you could certainly make them hit a lot harder. They do punch very much under their weight for 610mm torpedoes, like bizarrely so, and they could increase that, but I don't think that would fix the ship really. I mean, it's not like its torpedoes don't do a lot of damage anyway, it's just they're not all that easy to employ, and I don't think that would be a very complete solution. What would be a better choice, however, I think, is to allow it to take different weapon configurations. That the Yubari was refitted several times with different anti-aircraft armaments, and this is just the last version we see and the most powerful in anti-aircraft. What's interesting, however, is that the earlier versions, whilst having less powerful anti-aircraft armament, had another pair of 140mm cannon in single mounts, one at the front where the 120 is, and one at the rear where that triple mounted, triple barreled 25mm is. And so you could have it with two setups it can take essentially, one which will be the more specialised anti-aircraft role and is not so useful for public matches, but would be a very strong selling point just as much as it is now for those more specialised roles, and a second, more forgiving setup for public matches, in which case it would essentially be a more fragile and slightly quirkier Kuma. And I'm going to have to cut the game off just before it ends naturally, because at this point Google Chrome decides that it needs all of 12 gigabytes to run 3 tabs or so, and oh, I hate that program. But anyway, the game crashes horribly and freezes up. It gets like 2 frames every minute or something. It all just goes wrong, and we're about 30 seconds from the end of the match anyway, so I'll cut it off and go straight to these results screens so you can see how it's done. This wasn't a selected match. I didn't pick a particularly good match because I wanted to promote the ship. I didn't pick a particularly bad match because I wanted it to be buffed. This is actually just the first match I got into after doing the first half of the review. The second match I've ever played in the ship, I did one beforehand just to check that what I thought about it was correct, and that I wasn't missing anything obvious and stupid. It's fairly decent, you know, it's done enough damage for the tier. It's not a game to complain about in any way. I'm not saying at any point that this is a bad ship, just that it's highly specialised to the point that quite a lot of people might not be interested in it for a large enough proportion of their games for it to be worth it for them. I would recommend it. I quite enjoy it, having played a few games since then. It's a very nice ship, I like it, and it does have those special helpful abilities that are pretty much unique to it. But if you just want a premium ship that you can play all the time for that little bit of extra grind and crew training, then I wouldn't say this is a great choice for it. On the other hand, when you get team results like these with 2 Yubaris on the top of one team, another on top of the other, you get the suspicion that they're not all as bad as people are making them out to be.